The moment I whispered those words into Jake Morrison's ear, his hand froze midair, still holding the strand of fairy lights we'd been draping across the garden trellis. His jaw tightened. His blue eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that made my stomach drop. And in that fraction of a second, I realized I just detonated a bomb that could destroy my son's wedding, my reputation, and the only chance at happiness I'd felt in 15 years. But what terrified me most wasn't what I'd said. It was that Jake didn't step away. He didn't laugh it off. He leaned closer, his breath warm against my neck, and whispered back 3 words that made my knees buckle. "You have no idea," he said, "how long I've been waiting for you to say that." And that's when I heard the back door swing open and my son's voice call out, "Mom? Jake? Where are you guys?" My name is Catherine Wells. I'm 52 years old, and until 6 weeks before my son's wedding, I believed my life was effectively over. Not in the dramatic, cry-into-your-wine way, though there had been plenty of that. I mean, I had genuinely accepted that the chapters involving passion, desire, and being truly seen by another human being had closed permanently. I was a divorced mother of one, a successful interior designer in Charlotte, North Carolina, with long silky dark hair that I kept meticulously styled, a figure I worked hard to maintain at the gym every morning at 5:30, and a smile that everyone said could light up a room. What they didn't know was that behind that smile lived a secret so painful, I hadn't told a single soul in over 2 decades. A secret that, if it ever surfaced, would rewrite everything my son believed about his family. My son, Daniel Wells, was 27, a software engineer with his father's height and my stubborn streak. He was marrying his college sweetheart, Megan Park, a pediatric nurse with a laugh like wind chimes and a heart bigger than anyone deserved. Their wedding was set for June 14th at our family estate, a sprawling property with gardens I'd spent 20 years cultivating into something that belonged in a magazine. Daniel had asked his best friend since college to be his best man. That best friend was Jake Morrison. I first met Jake 3 years earlier at Daniel's graduation party. He'd walked in wearing a wrinkled button-down with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms that belonged on a Roman sculpture, and immediately tripped over the welcome mat. "Gravity and I have an ongoing disagreement," he'd said, catching himself on the doorframe and grinning at me with a confidence that seemed almost impossible for someone who just nearly face-planted. He was 22 then, charming, impossibly quick-witted, and possessing the kind of effortless charisma that made everyone in a room gravitate toward him. I'd shaken his hand, felt something electric move through my fingertips, and immediately buried it so deep I convinced myself it never happened. Over the next 3 years, Jake became a fixture in Daniel's life, and by extension in mine. He came to Thanksgiving dinners. He helped me repaint the guest bedroom one summer weekend. He argued with me about whether Hitchcock or Kubrick was the superior filmmaker with such passionate intelligence that I forgot, for entire stretches of time, the 25-year gap between us. He had a way of looking at me when I spoke, really looking, as though every word I said was the most important thing he'd ever heard. And each time I noticed it, I'd scold myself internally. "Stop it, Catherine. He's your son's age. He's being polite. You're projecting." But I wasn't projecting. And the 6 weeks before the wedding would prove that in ways I never could have anticipated. Started with a phone call. Daniel called me on a Tuesday evening, his voice tight with stress. Megan's mother, who had been handling the wedding coordination, had fallen and broken her hip. She'd be in recovery for months. The wedding was 6 weeks away, and suddenly there was no one managing the decorations, the seating arrangements, the vendor timelines. "Mom, I know it's a lot to ask," Daniel said, "but could you take over? You literally design spaces for a living." I agreed immediately. What mother wouldn't? The next morning my doorbell rang at 7:15. I opened it in my robe, coffee in hand, hair still wet from the shower, and found Jake Morrison standing on my porch with a toolbox and a bag of pastries. "Daniel said you needed a co-pilot," he said, holding up the pastry bag. "I brought bribes." "Jake, you don't have to do this. You have a job. I work remotely 3 days a week, and my boss owes me about 400 hours of flex time. I'm yours." He paused, seemed to catch the double meaning, and his ears turned pink. "For the wedding. I'm yours for the wedding." I should have said no. I should have called one of my friends, hired an assistant, done anything other than spend 6 weeks in close proximity with a man who made me feel things I had no business feeling. But I didn't say no. I stepped aside, let him in, and sealed my fate. The first week was manageable. We worked side by side, reviewing Megan's vision boards, calling florists, sampling cake flavors. Jake was surprisingly organized, keeping spreadsheets and timelines that impressed even my professional eye. But it was the in-between moments that began to unravel me. The way he'd hand me a cup of coffee made exactly how I liked it without ever being told. The way he'd catch me rubbing my neck after hours of phone calls and say, "You carry your stress like a backpack full of bricks, Catherine. Somebody should fix that." The way my name sounded in his mouth, each syllable deliberate, like he was savoring it. "You know," he said one afternoon as we knelt together in the garden, marking where the ceremony arch would go. "For someone who creates beautiful spaces for a living, you don't seem to believe you deserve to inhabit one yourself." I looked up sharply. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Your house is gorgeous. Every room is perfect. But your bedroom looks like a hotel room. No personal photos, no mess, no evidence that anyone actually lives there. It's like you've designed yourself out of your own life." The accuracy of his observation hit me like a slap. I blinked, looked away. "You're very observant for someone who can't walk through a doorway without tripping." He laughed, that full-bodied laugh that crinkled the corners of his eyes. Deflection through insult. Classic Catherine Wells maneuver. "I don't deflect. You're deflecting right now. I'm redirecting. There's a difference." There really isn't. If you're already feeling the tension between these two, wait until you hear what happens next. Drop a comment below telling me what you think Catherine's secret is. I bet no one will guess it. By the end of the second week, something had shifted between us. The banter grew sharper, more loaded. Jake would find excuses to stand close to me, reaching past me for supplies, steadying me when I climbed a ladder. Once, while we were testing string lights in the garden at dusk, a strand went out, and he reached over my shoulder to adjust the connection. His chest pressed against my back for just a moment, and I felt his heartbeat. It was racing. "Got it," he murmured, but neither of us moved. "Jake," I said quietly. "Yeah." The lights fixed. "I know." 3 more seconds passed. Then he stepped back, cleared his throat, and made a joke about faulty wiring that I didn't hear because my pulse was thundering so loudly it drowned out everything. Then came the afternoon that changed everything between us, the moment neither of us planned and neither of us could ever take back. It was the end of the second week. A late spring storm rolled through Charlotte without warning, the sky splitting open like a wound. We'd been working in the garden shed, organizing vases and ribbon for the centerpieces, when the downpour turned biblical. Rain hammered the tin roof so loudly we had to shout to hear each other. Lightning cracked overhead, and the single bare bulb flickered and died, plunging us into near darkness. "Well," Jake said somewhere to my left, "this is atmospheric." I laughed nervously and reached for my phone to use as a flashlight. I stepped forward at the same moment he moved toward me, and my foot caught on a stack of garden stakes. I pitched forward with a gasp. Jake lunged to catch me, and we went down together, his back hitting a pile of folded tablecloths that had been stacked on the workbench. The tablecloth slid, the bench scraped, and suddenly I was lying directly on top of him in the pitch dark, my hands braced against his chest, his arms wrapped around my waist from the catch, our faces inches apart. Neither of us breathed. Rain roared against the roof. Thunder rolled somewhere distant. I could feel the entire length of his body beneath mine, warm and solid and unmistakably responsive. His heart was pounding so hard I felt it through his shirt and through my palms and through every inch of skin where we touched. My hair had fallen like a curtain around both our faces, sealing us in a world that was only darkness and heat, and the impossible electricity of two bodies that had been aching toward each other for weeks. "Catherine," he whispered, and his voice was different now. Raw. Stripped of every joke and every shield. His hands were still on my waist, and his fingers tightened involuntarily, pulling me closer by a fraction of an inch that felt like a mile. "I should get up," I breathed, but I didn't move. My body had betrayed my brain entirely. Every nerve ending was lit, every rational thought dissolving like sugar in rain. "You should," he agreed, and his thumb traced a slow, devastating circle on my hip bone through the thin fabric of my blouse. I don't think he even realized he was doing it. Or maybe he absolutely realized. My forehead dropped to his. Our noses touched. I could taste his breath, warm and sweet, and feel the barely contained tremor running through his entire body. He was holding himself back with everything he had, and I could feel the effort like heat radiating from a furnace. His fingers slid upward along my spine, feather-light, as if memorizing the architecture of my body through touch alone. A sound escaped my throat that I didn't recognize, something between a sigh and a surrender. "If you make that sound again," he murmured against my lips, "I'm not going to be able to stop." "Stop what?" I whispered, even though I knew. Even though every cell in my body was screaming the answer. His hand came up and brushed my hair back from my face, his fingers threading through the damp strands with a tenderness that made my chest physically ache. His thumb traced along my jawline, down to my chin, tilting my mouth toward his. The distance between our lips collapsed to nothing. I felt the ghost of his mouth against mine. Not quite a kiss, but so close that every atom between us was vibrating. "This," he breathed. And then lightning struck so close that the shed shook and both of us jumped. The bulb surged back to life overhead, flooding the tiny space with harsh fluorescent light. We stared at each other, frozen in the sudden brightness, his eyes wide and blazing with something that looked like equal parts desire and reverence. My lipstick was smudged where our mouths had almost touched. His shirt was pulled loose where my hands had unconsciously gripped the fabric. Footsteps splashed outside. The shed door banged open. It was Daniel, drenched and laughing, holding a broken umbrella over his head. "You guys okay in here? Power's out in the whole neighborhood and—" He stopped. Looked at me standing up too fast, smoothing my blouse. Looked at Jake sitting up on the scattered tablecloths, running his hand through disheveled hair. Looked at the space between us that was both infinite and not nearly enough. "Did something fall?" Daniel asked. "I tripped," I said too quickly. "Gravity," Jake added, getting to his feet with a composure I envied. "Your mother and I both have ongoing disputes with it." Daniel looked between us for one more second, then shrugged. "Come inside. I'm making hot chocolate." He left. I stood in that shed, trembling from head to foot, my skin still burning everywhere Jake had touched me. Jake stood 3 feet away, hands in his pockets, looking at me with an expression that combined absolute longing with something almost like pain. "That can't happen again," I said, though my voice had no conviction whatsoever. "You're right," he said. Then softer. "But you should know that was the most extraordinary thing that's never actually happened to me." Despite everything, I laughed. And something inside me shifted permanently, like a key turning in a lock that had been rusted shut for years. That night, I sat on my bed in my perfectly impersonal bedroom and stared at the ceiling. I was 52. He was 25. He was my son's best friend. This was insanity. I could still feel his hands on my waist, his breath against my mouth, the devastating tenderness of his fingers in my hair. This was the kind of thing that destroyed families, that turned you into a punchline, that made people whisper behind their hands at grocery stores. I knew all of this. I listed every reason this was wrong, and not a single one of them changed how I felt. Not a single one of them erased the echo of his body beneath mine in the dark. But the real crisis hadn't arrived yet. That came at the end of week 3, when the antagonist of this story walked back into my life. Richard Wells. My ex-husband. Daniel's father. The man I'd divorced 12 years earlier after discovering his affair with his secretary. A cliché so profound it almost felt fictional. Richard had remarried, divorced again, and now fancied himself a reformed man seeking reconnection with his son. He called Daniel, expressed a desire to be involved in the wedding, and Daniel, ever the peacemaker, said yes. So Richard showed up at the estate on a Wednesday afternoon, silver-haired and still handsome in that effortless way that had once swept me off my feet, driving a car that cost more than most people's houses. He walked through the garden where Jake and I were assembling centerpieces, looked around and said, "Well, Catherine, I see you found yourself a little helper." The condescension dripped like honey laced with poison. Jake stood up slowly, extending his hand. "Jake Morrison. Best man." Richard shook it with the kind of grip designed to establish dominance. Richard Wells. Father of the groom. So you're the kid who's been hanging around my ex-wife for weeks. I'm the man who's been helping your son prepare for the most important day of his life, Jake corrected, his smile never wavering but his eyes going cold. Nice to finally meet you. Daniel talks about you sometimes. The word sometimes landed like a precision strike. Richard's smile faltered for half a second before recovering. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from grinning. But Richard's return brought more than discomfort. Brought danger. Because Richard knew my secret. He was the only other person alive who did. And within days he made it clear he intended to use it. He cornered me in the kitchen that Friday evening, after Daniel and Megan had left and Jake had gone to pick up lumber for the ceremony platform. You look good, Catherine, he said, leaning against the counter. Really good. That boy certainly seems to think so. Don't start, Richard. I'm just making an observation. A 52-year-old woman and a 25-year-old kid. People might talk. People always talk. You taught me that. His expression hardened. I want back in, Catherine. Not with you, with Daniel. I want to walk him down the aisle. I want to give a speech. I want my place in this family restored. That's Daniel's decision. Is it? Because I think if Daniel knew certain things about his mother, things you've kept hidden for 27 years, he might see this family very differently. My blood turned to ice. He was talking about the secret. The one I'd buried so deep it had become part of my foundation. I looked at him, this man I'd once loved, and saw nothing but a weapon aimed at my heart. You wouldn't. I don't want to. But I will if I have to. Give me my place in this wedding, Catherine. The speech, the aisle, all of it. Or Daniel learns the truth. He left. I stood in the kitchen, gripping the counter so hard my knuckles turned white, and for the first time in years I cried. Deep, heaving sobs that came from somewhere so fundamental they felt geological. That's when Jake walked in. He'd come back early. He stood in the doorway, lumber forgotten, watching me fall apart. Without a word, he crossed the kitchen, took my hands off the counter, and wrapped his arms around me. I should have pushed him away. Instead, I buried my face in his chest, and let myself be held by someone who actually wanted to hold me. This time the embrace wasn't accidental. This time it was deliberate and fierce and full of every unspoken word between us. Whatever it is, he said into my hair, you don't have to carry it alone. You don't even know what it is. I don't need to. I know you. And whatever you're carrying, it's too heavy for one person. If this story is hitting you in the heart, smash that like button and subscribe so you don't miss how this unfolds. Trust me, the revelation coming is one you won't see coming. I pulled back, wiped my face, and made a decision that would change everything. I told him. I told Jake Morrison the secret I'd kept for 27 years. When I was 24, newly married to Richard, I discovered I was pregnant. But 3 months before that pregnancy, during a brief separation when Richard had moved out after our first major fight, I'd had a one-night encounter with someone else. A moment of loneliness and weakness and too much wine at a gallery opening. When I discovered the pregnancy, the timing made it impossible to know with certainty who the father was. Richard and I had reconciled by then. I chose to believe Daniel was his. I chose the life I'd built. I never told anyone. But the doubt, the gnawing, agonizing uncertainty, had lived inside me like a second heartbeat for 27 years. And Richard had discovered evidence of my indiscretion years later, during our divorce proceedings, when an old friend let something slip after too many cocktails. He'd done the math. He'd held it over me ever since. Jake listened without interrupting. When I finished, his expression wasn't one of judgment or shock. It was one of profound tenderness. Have you ever considered just finding out? He asked. DNA tests are simple. You could know. If Daniel isn't Richard's son, it destroys everything he believes about himself. Or it sets both of you free. You make it sound simple. I make it sound necessary. There's a difference. That night, Jake left at midnight. At the door he turned back. His hand lifted, and he tucked a strand of hair behind my ear with the same tenderness I'd felt in that dark shed. Catherine, for what it's worth, The woman who raised Daniel, who built this home, who creates beauty out of empty rooms, that's the woman he loves. Biology doesn't change that. Week 4 brought escalation on every front. Richard embedded himself in the wedding planning, undermining my decisions at every turn. He suggested a different florist, questioned my color palette, and told Megan that Catherine always did have trouble letting go of control. He was waging a quiet war, and every battle was designed to remind me that he held the detonator to my life. Meanwhile, the tension between Jake and me had become volcanic after the shed incident. We'd worked together all day, hyper-aware of every accidental touch, every brush of fingers over fabric samples, every moment our heads bowed together over seating charts. He started bringing me flowers, always wildflowers, always with a joke. These reminded me of you. Beautiful, slightly untamed, and probably allergic to something. I'm not allergic to anything. Give it time. I'm very irritating. On that we agree. But behind the jokes, the memory of his body beneath mine in the dark shed lived between us like a shared fever dream. Sometimes I'd catch him looking at my mouth and know exactly what he was remembering. One evening, while testing the sound system for the reception, a slow song came on. Without asking, Jake extended his hand. "Quality control," he said. "We need to make sure the dance floor works." "The dance floor is grass, Jake. It works by existing." "Then we're testing the grass." I took his hand. He pulled me close. We danced in the garden under a sky full of stars, his hand on the small of my back, my head eventually resting against his shoulder. Neither of us spoke. The song ended and we kept swaying. Then a second song played and a third. Somewhere during the fourth song, he tilted my chin up and looked at me with an expression that stripped away every defense I'd ever built. "I'm falling for you, Catherine. I've been falling for you for 3 years. I know the math doesn't work. I know the world will have opinions. I know your son is my best friend. But I have never in my entire life felt about anyone the way I feel about you. And I'm done pretending otherwise." My throat closed. My eyes burned. "Jake, this can't. Don't tell me what this can't be. Tell me what you feel." "I feel like I'm standing on the edge of a cliff and you're asking me to jump. I'm asking you to fly." Kissed him. Or he kissed me. Or we met somewhere in the middle, a collision of longing and fear and 3 years of pretending that the electricity between us was anything other than what it was. His hands cradled my face like I was something precious, something worth protecting. And I poured every lonely night and every morning I'd woken up believing I was past my prime, and every moment I'd looked at this man and felt alive again into that kiss. It was everything the shed had promised and more. It was a completion of something that had started in the dark and now blazed in starlight. We broke apart, breathing hard. He pressed his forehead to mine. "What now?" he asked. "Now we figure out how to not destroy everything." But destruction was already en route, wearing a tailored suit and carrying 27 years of ammunition. The confrontation came at the worst possible moment. It was the rehearsal dinner, 1 week before the wedding. 50 guests gathered in the garden I transformed into something magical, fairy lights cascading from every tree, long tables draped in ivory linen, candles flickering like earth-bound stars. Daniel stood to toast Megan, and his words were so sincere, so full of love, that half the table was in tears. Then Richard stood up. "I'd like to say a few words," he announced, champagne glass raised. "About family. About truth. About the importance of honesty in a marriage." His eyes found mine across the table. The threat was unmistakable. My heart stopped. Jake, seated 3 chairs away, went rigid. He'd read the room instantly. Richard launched into what appeared to be a heartfelt speech about Daniel's childhood. But I could hear the undertow. He was building toward something. Each anecdote was laced with subtle references to secrets and hidden truths. He was circling my secret like a shark. "And I think the most important lesson I can offer," Richard continued, his voice carrying across the silent garden, "is that the foundation of any family should be built on truth, even when the truth is difficult, even when it challenges everything you thought you knew. Because lies, no matter how well-intentioned, have a way of." To Daniel and Megan. Jake was on his feet, glass raised, his voice cutting through Richard's speech like a blade. "The best couple I've ever known. built on a foundation of love, respect, and terrible taste in movies. Laughter rippled through the guests. Daniel, you're my brother in every way that matters. And Megan, thank you for agreeing to keep him. We were all getting worried. More laughter. Jake had seized the room, redirecting the current like a master electrician. Richard stood there, speech derailed, smile frozen. Under the table I was shaking. Jake caught my eye and gave me the smallest nod. I've got you. After the dinner, Richard found me alone by the garden shed. The same shed where everything had shifted between Jake and me. The irony wasn't lost on me. That boy of yours just made a very big mistake. He's not my boy. No? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're sleeping with your son's best friend. What I do is none of your business. It's absolutely my business when it affects my son's wedding. Tell me, Catherine, does Daniel know his mother is having an affair with a man his own age? Because if that doesn't scream midlife crisis, I don't know what does. You're one to talk about affairs, Richard. His face darkened. I'm done being patient. You have until the wedding. Either you tell Daniel the truth about his paternity or I will. And I'll make sure everyone knows about your little romance too. Let's see how that picture looks. He walked away. I stood in the darkness, the scent of jasmine surrounding me, and felt the walls closing in. That night I made two decisions. First, I would take a DNA test. Jake was right. 27 years of uncertainty had to end. Second, I would tell Daniel about Jake. Not because Richard forced my hand, but because my son deserved honesty from at least one of his parents. The DNA results would take 5 days. The wedding was in 7. The timing was either providential or catastrophic. I told Daniel on a Tuesday morning. We sat on the porch swing where I'd rocked him as a baby and I said, "There's something I need to tell you about Jake and me." Daniel was quiet for a long time. Then he said something that shattered me. "Mom, I've known for months." "What?" "The way he looks at you. The way you light up when he's around." "I'm not blind. Jake called me 3 weeks ago and told me himself. He said he'd rather lose my friendship than disrespect me by hiding it." "He called you?" "He's my best friend, Mom. He's also the most honest person I know." He said, "I'm in love with your mother. And I need you to know that before anything happens, because your trust matters more to me than my own happiness." What kind of person says that? "And you're not angry?" Daniel took my hand. "Mom, you've been alone for 12 years. You've given everything to me. You've smiled through every holiday, every birthday, every moment when I know you were lonely. If Jake makes you happy, actually happy, then I'm not angry. I'm grateful." I fell apart for the second time in a month. But this time the tears were different. They were the kind that wash things clean. The DNA results arrived on Thursday, 2 days before the wedding. I sat at the kitchen table with the envelope, unable to open it. Jake sat across from me, hands folded, waiting. "Whatever it says," he told me, "Daniel is your son. That's the only result that matters." I opened it. Daniel was Richard's biological son. 27 years of agony, 27 years of secret terror. And the answer had been there all along. Richard's weapon was a loaded gun that had never actually been loaded. The relief was so overwhelming I laughed and cried simultaneously. A sound so strange that Jake looked genuinely concerned. "Good news or mental breakdown?" he asked. "Both. Definitely both." I called Richard that evening. "I got a DNA test. Daniel is yours. He's always been yours. Your leverage is gone." Silence. Then quietly, "I never wanted to use it, Catherine. I just wanted to matter." For the first time in 12 years I heard something real in his voice. Something broken. "You're his father, Richard. You've always mattered. But you can't bully your way into someone's heart." The wedding day arrived on a Saturday gilded with sunshine. The garden looked like something from a dream, every detail reflecting weeks of love and labor, and the quiet revolution that had happened between two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely circumstances. The ceremony arch dripped with white roses and eucalyptus. The aisle was lined with candles and glass hurricanes. The fairy lights waited for dusk like bottled starlight. Richard walked Daniel partway down the aisle. I walked him the rest. A compromise that felt, for the first time, like peace. Jake stood at the altar as best man, looking at me across the ceremony with an expression of such open, unguarded love that several guests followed his gaze and smiled knowingly. When Daniel and Megan exchanged vows, Jake's eyes never left mine. He mouthed something I couldn't quite read. Later he'd tell me it was our turn someday. The reception was magical. Daniel and Megan's first dance made everyone cry. Richard gave a short, genuinely heartfelt toast that surprised everyone, including himself. And when the band played a slow song midway through the evening, Jake crossed the dance floor, extended his hand to me in front of everyone, and said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear, "May I have this dance, Catherine?" Whispers. Raised eyebrows. A few smiles. Daniel from across the tent raised his glass. We danced. And this time we didn't hide. It was later that evening, during a quiet moment between reception events, that the moment happened. The moment that started this story. Jake and I had slipped away to adjust some lights on the garden trellis that had come loose. We were standing close, fingers tangled in fairy lights, the noise of the celebration drifting over the hedges like music from another world. He looked beautiful in the half-light. His suit jacket was off, sleeves rolled up, a streak of pollen on his cheek from adjusting the floral arrangements earlier. He caught me staring and smiled. "See something you like?" "I see something I love." The word hung between us like a held breath. I'd never said it to him before in exactly that way. His eyes changed, going soft and fierce at the same time. His hand stopped moving. And something reckless and brave and utterly alive rose up in me, fueled by the joy of the day and the relief of secrets finally released and the intoxicating reality that this extraordinary man loved me back. I leaned close to his ear and whispered, "Want to practice the honeymoon part?" His hand froze. The fairy lights swayed. And the look he gave me wasn't shock. It was recognition. Like he'd been waiting at a door I'd finally opened. "You have no idea," he whispered back, "how long I've been waiting for you to say that." That's when the back door opened. Daniel's voice rang out. "Mom? Jake? Where are you guys? Megan's about to throw the bouquet." We stepped apart, breathless, grinning like conspirators. Jake fixed the last light. I smoothed my dress. We walked back into the reception side by side, not touching, but connected by an invisible thread that hummed with promise. Megan threw the bouquet. It sailed over a crowd of reaching hands and landed, with almost supernatural precision, directly in my arms. The crowd erupted. Jake laughed so hard he had to lean on Daniel's shoulder. Daniel looked at me, looked at Jake, and shook his head with a grin. The universe isn't exactly subtle, is it? If this story moved you, if it made you believe that love doesn't have an expiration date, please share it with someone who needs to hear that message. Subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell, so you never miss another story like this one. The wedding ended at midnight. Guests departed. Daniel and Megan left for their honeymoon in a shower of sparklers and cheers. Richard shook my hand at the gate and said, "You did a beautiful job, Catherine. With the wedding. With Daniel. With everything." It wasn't enough to erase years of hurt, but it was a beginning. Jake and I stood alone in the empty garden, surrounded by the beautiful wreckage of the best day. Overturned champagne glasses, scattered petals, candles burning down to their last inch. He took my hand. "So," he said, his voice low and warm, "about that honeymoon practice. I believe the trellis still needs work. Catherine Wells, are you deflecting again?" "I'm redirecting. There's really no difference." I kissed him under the fairy lights, in the garden I'd built over 20 years, surrounded by the remnants of my son's happily ever after. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I wasn't designing a beautiful space for someone else to inhabit. I was standing inside my own life, fully present, fully seen, and fully loved by a man who had first fallen for me while tripping over a welcome mat. Jake moved in 3 months later. Daniel pretended to be horrified and then helped carry boxes. Richard sent a bottle of wine with a note that said, "To new beginnings." I framed it, partly out of sentiment and partly because I never thought I'd see the day. At 52, I learned something I wish I'd known decades earlier. Love isn't about timing or age, or what the world considers appropriate. Love is about finding the person who looks at you, really looks, and sees not the years on your face but the fire still burning behind your eyes. It's about being brave enough to whisper something terrifying and finding out the other person was waiting to hear it. It's about understanding that the chapters you thought were finished might just be the prologue to the greatest story you'll ever live. Jake still trips over the welcome mat. I still carry my stress like a backpack full of bricks. He still brings me wildflowers with terrible jokes, and I still pretend they don't make my heart sore. Sometimes on rainy afternoons, we'll be working in that garden shed and he'll catch my eye and smile, and we'll both remember the storm that knocked out the lights and knocked down every wall between us. But now when he reaches for me in the morning, half asleep and smiling, and mumbles, "Still here," I whisper back, "Still here," and mean it with every fiber of my being. To everyone watching this who has ever been told they're too old for love, too broken for happiness, or too far past their prime for passion, I want you to hear me clearly. You are not too anything. You are exactly enough, exactly now, exactly as you are. Your story isn't over. The best chapter might be the one you haven't written yet. And if you're standing at the edge of your own cliff, afraid to jump, let me tell you what a 25-year-old man with an aesthetic build and terrible coordination once told me in a garden full of fairy lights. Don't jump. Fly. Thank you for staying until the end. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment telling me what moment hit you the hardest. Like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe so we can keep telling stories that remind us all what it means to be human. Until next time, take care of your hearts. They're braver than you think.